All right, now with that story from Apollo James, we are going to transition to our discussion today, where we'll be talking about industrialization in Kenya. And I have with me John Karani, who is joining us, and he's the chair of Kenya Institute of Supply Management in Kenya, Supplies Management in Kenya. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kelvin.
All right, now when you talk about industrialization, first of all, even before moving forward, what do we exactly mean?
It's basically moving away from what we call the manual processes or being done mechanized processes. And it's good to go back to history and see how industrialization started. We moved from that mechanized way of doing things. It was labor intensive in the beginning. If you recall, in the Industrial Revolution, the very first one, then we moved to what we call automation. Then we now moved to robotic era. And today, picking up from the story that was just on, we're in the digital economy. That's where we are, and this is leapfrogging the whole industrialization agenda, being able to manufacture locally, being able to create things locally, instead of now depending on the agricultural economy. And that's really the gist of industrialization.
All right, and also now speaking about manufacturing equipment locally and things locally, in terms of connecting with industrialization, as a country, where are we in terms of that?
This is really the history of where we are in terms of being a manufacturing hub or industrial hub. For the longest time, we were the source of raw material for the first world economy. They came to Kenya, or Africa in that case, in the very early, the whole drive of the colonial era was how can we get raw material to power the industrial revolution that was happening there. And they made sure they made this technology a preserve of their own. And so we are today struggling to catch up, really because of the capital and nature that we need to industrialize, having the equipment necessary. And so much as we are the source of the raw material, we have to import the technology, which is actually almost a preserve of the China, Europe, and all that. And that's the gap we have to do. Can we create the actual capital equipment, manufacture them locally? Because we don't need to recreate all this, we can borrow. We can borrow the knowledge that they already have and recreate them. China did this. They were not like Europe or like America. And they did a lot of copycatting, but today they manufacture cheaper equipment, better equipment, more efficient. What can we learn as Africa and as Kenya especially? Because these countries have already gone ahead of us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We know already what we need. We actually have the capacity, the technology in terms of skill set. And that's what we need to borrow. How can we borrow these ideas and create our own homegrown equipment? We don't need to create them. We can actually bring one. And the Chinese, what do? They break it down and get all the parts and reinvent and recreate a better equipment, more efficient. And we used to laugh at them as copycats, but today China is a fully fledged industrial economy, exporting equipment to other countries, including to Europe and to America. World-class equipment made in China. There's always what we call first world equipment from China, and in the third world. We need to know what do we need in Africa for us to industrialize. It's really the manufacturing capacity, and it's a technical capability, technological capability, which we are able to do. We just need to borrow quickly. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have a lot of people who have gone ahead of us, countries. So we as Africa, much as we've been for a long time been made the source of raw material, we can leapfrog that journey and start having our own industrial hubs based on the resources that we have. We don't need to import any resource. We have everything here.
All right, and with us and also trying to make sure that we are industrialized, what are some of the pillars of industrialization that we can tap into in order for us to at least even grow in the coming years?
Yeah, so the things that drive industrialization is really, first of all, the infrastructure. The infrastructure, let me start with the people. The crucial resource for any industrialization is the skilled labor force. We in Kenya have one of the most educated, well-trained, skilled labor force. And that is a key driver of industrialization, people that are already fully equipped. And that's why you'll see a lot of the training must anchor towards, I want to call it scientific subjects, which help people to do now proper manufacturing. Skill set must now up technological skill set, digital. We're in the digital economy now. But most importantly is just how can we develop the actual human capital not just the labor force that we have, the manual people, but the skilled people that can work in an industry in this era of robotics, in this era of the what I call fourth industrial revolution, where technology is a key driver. That is where we are, and we have that capacity. That's the most important thing. The next key driver of any industrialization is what I call infrastructure. This is both physical and technological infrastructure. Now, physical means the roads, the transportation system, the logistical system. It must be very conducive. You know, when you think about how the Industrial Revolution happened in Europe, they started because of ability to transport things long distances, but power. It was powered by the steam engine those days. You remember the locomotives of the first industrial area before they now moved. So it was powered by steam power and water power, including the transportation mechanism. It was being done by rail and by water and by road. Today we don't need to do that. We have gone many steps ahead. We now have proper rail transport, air. Logistics does not need to be by water. Water is still a key one, and we'll talk about that later on when you think about Lake Victoria being a very real hub, especially from Kisumu, creating the shipping mechanism to transport all the way across the borders to Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, which are landlocked. So transport infrastructure is crucial for driving that type of thing. And then finally, technology, as we said earlier on. How can we develop our own homegrown solutions to power the era of industrialization? And finally is again what we call as we're living in the digital economy. We have the requisite in software. Now it's no longer the hardware, it's the software to drive industrialization. And I think we have it in Kenya. Yeah.
And now, as you've mentioned all these aspects and the pillars of industrialization, when we look at in terms of trying to actualize this and making them make sense for even a person who is not living in an urban area that can be able to access this, how do we then make sure that a young person who is coming from the rural area into a city establishment, that they also get into this groove of industrial revolution?
That's a very good question, and you've got to take it back to the last question that was online, the digital economy. The fact that we are now wired, so to speak, across the country. And my kids always used to tell me, Daddy, Google is your friend. Now, I don't always recommend that you go to Google for everything, but I can tell you with the internet, with the free Wi-Fi availability, to tap a lot of information online, to be able to catch on quickly. What we need now, and I think what we're creating a lot in Africa, in Kenya, I've heard about digital villages. And I think that mashinani type thing must come very live, so that you must join these kind of communities, the digital communities, and learn quickly what's going on. That's where the world is going to. Digital economy, digital communities, and digital villages. And eventually, those will be the hubs that will drive the revolution. And anybody who can catch on to now that you have the free Wi-Fi that we've been told, increasingly more affordable, people can catch on. And the key thing is create this community. Today, there are so many digital environments in terms of WhatsApp groups, so many ways that people communicate. Of course, a lot of the information, you have to sift it and see what is right, including going to Google. Don't take everything on Google.
Yes.
But sift the information. I can tell you, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of information freely online. The key thing is how do we craft it in a way that it's usable, it can actually be not destructive, in the sense of how can we leverage technology, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data. That's where, and these young people they know all these things. They can actually tap into that. And that's where we have to go. We are truly in the era of big data.
All right, even in the era of big data, now let's look at Vision 2030, because this has always been a talk when it comes to technology, digital migration, when we are looking at it and we are saying by 2030 the country, Kenya, needs to be at this level. So when you look at it and look at increasing manufacturing from 11% to around 20% of the GDP, how can this be actualized really?
And I think it's a very good question. Let me tell you, the Vision 2030 was very well crafted. We're only less than 8 years, I think 8 years to that timing. The question is how are we on that continuum, on that journey? And I think that's a very good question to really ask. And it's anchored a lot on what we call the enabling environment to accelerate this development. And they say manufacturing should be greater than 15%. You know, today we're 11, at least upwards of 20. The challenge we have right now, and a lot of things have happened, unfortunately, to almost derail that journey. But we are not yet there. So I'm saying this because there's still a lot of things in terms of supporting local manufacturing, in terms of supporting ability to do our things locally and be a middle income, they say middle income economy by 2030. Now, Kenya today is on average one of the more industrialized nations in East Africa. But I want to take us to the example of this country called Ethiopia. Ethiopia next door here have done 3-4 key things that are helping them leapfrog the Industrial Revolution journey. And this is really using what they have, power. They developed the largest dam in Africa, the Renaissance Dam, which is on the River Nile, on the Blue Nile. It's now going to be the largest dam in Africa. That's what you need in this revolution, power, energy, electricity, to power any revolution, or the economic revolution, industrial revolution. That's be powered through energy. And today, you cannot continue using fossil power. They are using natural sources, water, to power the energy revolution. That will give them complete sustainability, almost being able to depend on its own and export more in terms of power. The other thing they did is to leverage what they have, agriculture. We have the same, but they have been very strategic. They don't do everything. What are the agricultural areas they want to do? It is around sugarcane. They're going to be a net exporter of sugar across this region. The whole agriculture, they have a lot of agriculture base. Now horticulture, which is the mainstay of Kenya's economy, has gone to Ethiopia. We are the people who did that. They are doing tea also and coffee. I'm saying this to say the key pillars that will drive any industrial revolution: energy, agriculture, having the commodities necessary to support your industry. And they are doing other, what we call industrial parks. They are developing industrial parks to do export things. They are doing leather. They have a lot of cows, like us, but they are using their cows not just to eat the meat, but they use the skin to do leather goods, shoes, jackets. Ethiopia is going to be a massive industrial exporter. And finally, what they have done, despite being a landlocked country, is what we call infrastructure development. They have probably one of the best rapid rail and build at a cheaper rail cost than ours, which can literally connect the whole city. All these things are telling you one thing. If we could do the same thing, they have been very intentional, they've been very targeted, and they know what they want to focus on. And that's what you've got to do as a country like ours. What are we good at? What are the resources that we have? Have we built? Do we know where to get power from? Because we have a lot of rivers here, water, solar, and which is what we started doing with our geothermal energy, with the solar projects in Turkana, here in Ngong. All these are things that must be harnessed to now create self-sustainability in the key pillars that underpin an industrial revolution.
And also, even what you are speaking about and the industrial revolution and also what we need to do and emulate other countries also. Now, some recommendations for the Ministry of Industrialization in Kenya. When we look at it, and now that we have a new government, of course, everyone wants to do and make sure that the ministry is working towards just improving the standards. So what are some of the recommendations from where you sit?
So the good thing is that we have everything on paper, whether it's Vision 2030 or indeed the manifesto of the Kenya Kwanza team. It's a well thought out manifesto, very comprehensive, by the way, with all the pillars that anchor an industrial revolution. The key thing always about all these things is how do we translate what's on paper to actual realization. We have all the plans. But the first thing to do really for us in Kenya is how do we be very strategic in supporting local industries. And does not mean you're killing import business, because before long, it's so easy to become a net importer and a trading economy. And I see that happening very clearly when we make the cost of importing raw materials, the cost of importing equipment, the cost of importing the key things that will actually help us to develop our own capacity, becoming more and more expensive. And people can bring in their fully manufactured goods into Kenya and they sell them cheaply. We need to put barriers. And I don't want to be controversial, but you know, the whole mitumba industry is a very controversial topic. But we in Kenya used to have cotton. We grow cotton. We can actually encourage. Industrial revolution has to be driven by what do you have at your hand, and agriculture is what we have. Can we grow our own cotton? Can we grow our own pyrethrum? Can we grow our own raw material that will now become the raw material? We don't need to export them. They become our own industrial revolution drivers. Now, the thing that we must also think about is what we call regional economic hubs in terms of county. And that's one thing I always say. Each county, like textile industry in Kitui here, you don't need to replicate the same. Support them, grow the cotton, and get the raw material here. And they can now become a hub for textile. Look at another place where you go, like the coastal region. It grows tropical fruits all the time. You can manufacture juices. Another hub can come there. Go to the western region. If we can have those regional economic blocks up in the North Rift, you can create your own manufacturing hub. So it's got to be very targeted. It's got to be very devolved in the spirit of devolution, so that we can now grow industrial hub. You don't all need to manufacture. What is the competence? What's the thing, the comparative economic advantage for each region? What do you have? And then grow that. But there's got to be support from the top. I always tell the story of South Korea and their industrial revolution. They started off where we are today, in the 60s. We were actually more advanced than South Korea. But what did they do? The government of South Korea identified key industries, key areas where they wanted to excel. They didn't want to do everything, but they said they must do, say, today you have Samsung, today you have the fridge, the refrigeration, today you have cars. And what did they do? They were not really necessarily protective, but they actually intentionally said, increase the taxes of imported raw material, whether it's cars, whether it is refrigerators, whether it is phones, everything that they wanted to do locally. And then they went ahead and supported that local industry. They started small, like cottage industry and SMEs, like we are doing right now, but today they are world-class industries. What does it tell you? We need leadership, goodwill, support to make sure we support identify and support the local industries. And we will be an industrial economy in a very short while with the goodwill of the politicians, the leaders, and the people of Kenya.